Right guys, hi there. As you can see, it's time for paint. There's still some pieces on the workbench that need a bit of work, a bit of sanding, but I've broken everything down. I've got 21 bits to paint. Okay guys, so I've just done what's called a mist coat over everything because I did run out of paint. So it's got a light coating of paint on it. This is good in some areas, but in a lot it's pretty iffy. But it is there, so when you spray the next coat on, it takes better. This piece, I was wondering what I was going to do, because moving this in and out, it's going to scratch any paint off there really easily. But brainstorm, colour it in with a black texture, stain the plastic, and then get what's called silver rub and buff, and just rub some along the edges. You'll see Adam Savage use it in his build. Also what I've done is on the shell, there's a tiny little screw I've put in, a little pan head, and what that does, it sits under there and just holds that up more and supports it, so it's not just sitting in space. Right guys, all little finishing off bits. I cut 5 centimetres off each, well, a bit more than 5 off that. 5 centimetres off the end of the main legs, about 8 off the end of the others, just so it's a bit shorter, it fits in just in where the bend for the foregrip goes. And there's my little epoxy putty support. Now I've pushed that down into the groove and also made it so high so it gives it a lot of support, so it's not going to wiggle, and also while it's soft, sculpted it into a nice shape so I don't have to worry too much about sanding. Now I've already started undercoating, and it's at this stage that I'm starting to get the ideas for the actual paint job, because when you're looking at something like this and there's all these colours all over the place, it tends to create a bit of havoc with your perception. I've noticed that once you've got everything painted, you'll know if things don't work, but once it's all got a uniform colour and things are looking good and are in the right proportions, suddenly details start leaping out at you. And right guys, I'm just up to the salt phase. I've undercoated everything with a dark red. I buy something called Mana Red. It's a top coat, but it works. It gives me my rust colour. So, having now seen it all as one colour, this is leading on from those images I showed you just a bit earlier, I can see the model more. And the first thing that stuck out with me is this line right across the top here. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to rust that off, make that look like metal. This will be the plastic body. This hand grip will be painted like a dark black or grey, same as the pistol grip. So I've only got 3 primary colours, it's not too busy. And then there's going to be a camouflage pattern over that as well. What I do, I've already sprayed it Mana Red, but I just put a bit more on just to make it a bit sticky. And then I've just got salt, normal sea salt. I get this at my local store, buy bags of it, rock salt, and you can buy a grinder as well full of it, and just grind it out in a little bowl and just sprinkle it on the wet paint. I've just noticed that little button there, it looks like a couple of rivets holding things together, so I'm going to make that metal as well, simply by making it look like it's rusty. So on this is the top of the gun, the top of the housing, so most of that's going to be, you know, a plastic or polymer or something. But what I'm looking at is, I think this would be metal, even if it's painted the same colour, so we'll have some wear on that. And I'll just put a little bit of salt along the top here, so it'll look like the front end cap is metal as well. So, you spray our paint where we want it to look rusty, because this salt comes off later in the next couple of steps. It looks counterintuitive, but it actually works really well. Now, that top rail will be heavily worn because things are being clipped onto it all the time. Because this is a multi-purpose, multi-roll blaster. So it'll be pretty heavily worn. But even at this stage, after you've washed off the salt and before you put any other colour on, you can go over the salt again and, you know, change how things look. Now, it's not going to matter anything that falls on the plastic, because when I come to the masking, which is the next step, I just won't mask that bit, so it will get covered. Those perceived rust spots will get covered by the next colour that goes on, so it's not a great issue. Because I try to keep masking to a minimum, because if you do that, you get a minimum of paint being torn off by masking tape. Now, I've just done most of the gun in the second step, which is the spraying of the silver. As you can see, it's not a complete coverage because I only spray it where I want wear to show, and that's going to be on the high points, on the ridges, around the muzzle, at the front, anywhere the gun's going to contact something, whether it be the ground or a person or a blast from the shell coming out of the barrel. That's where your wear's going to be. And what I use is this. It's called Duramax. It's stainless steel finish and it's expensive. It's about 20 bucks a can, but it's really good. I have been looking for a substitute, and I have tried things in the past, and some of them have worked and some of them haven't. There's this stuff, which is Rust-Oleum metallic soft iron. It's not too bad, but the nozzle is gets a bit spitty. Spits great lumps of paint all over your work. So, and I have looked at this stuff. This I can get at local IGA hardware store. I can get five tins for 20 bucks. So I get a mixture of black, white, flat black, flat white, silver. It's a bit bright, but the test piece I'm looking at here, I've sprayed on this metal frame, which is, you can just see where my finger is. It's actually drying about the same colour as this stuff, so I might try this on the next one. So the red's on there. I sprinkle it with the rust of, the salt, which will make it look rusty, and I've done it on this piece, so that's going to be made to look like it's metal too. So the trick is just to spray where you want some metal to show. Whether it be wear, around the rust. It's a bit hard to comprehend it at the moment, but when I come back to it and I take off that salt, you'll have silver with a spot of rust in it. And then what we do, we would put a resist on it before we paint the next step. And the resist, for me, I used to use, well, I tried using latex, and it's a pain in the ass to get off and it costs a fortune. So I use this. This is what's called clay slip. It's liquid clay. In this case, it's dried out because it's been sitting there for ages. I haven't used it in a while. So what I'll do when I'm finished here is put some water in that, chuck it on the shelf, and tomorrow I'll come back and I'll have this gooey, sludgy mess. Very much like the goo glue, except it's just clay. I'll paint it on these areas roughly, not perfectly, roughly. So when I do the overcoat and spray over with it, we're going to get a metallic look with rust spots on it. These metallic bits are also going to be sprayed black before I remove the resist. So once you remove the resist, which is the clay, you'll have a black surface with a spot of silver in it and a few spots of rust. Let me get another piece and show you an example. Right, I know this might be a bit hard to understand, so here's an example. This is the first piece I did with this technique, and as you can see, let me just stand it up there so I can then zoom the camera in on it. So as you can see, we've got a blue body, we've got silver showing through where the paint's worn off, and little flecks of rust. That's the effect I'm trying to get. And this is the way you do it. You have to sort of think backwards while you're doing it. So you start with the rust, put the salt on, put the silver on, we put the resist on, the clay, then we put our top coat, which in this case will be black for the metal and some sort of dusky red for the plastic areas. So now we've done that, and we can clean off the salt. When we come to do the clay resist, we can not cover certain areas if there's too much silver in one area, and that'll just get covered by the top coat. And when we rub off the resist, because that area doesn't have any resist on it, it won't rub off, so you'll get a better coating of the particular colour you want. So I hope this is clear. Feel free to message me, email me, put a note on YouTube asking for directions. So now the last thing for me to do before I leave is just fill this up with water, so that'll make it go soft. So tomorrow when I come back to put the resist on, it'll be easy. water in the bucket, and I don't know if you can hear that bubbling, that's the water going down into it. Right guys, next day, back to get off the salt, just using a little sponge scouring pad. It's going to scratch the silver paint, but that really doesn't matter since most of it's going to be painted, and anything that's uncovered is going to be scratched anyway. So just getting the salt off. Now I could, what I used to do in the past was wherever there was salt, I would paint the clay over it as well, and then clean it all off later. And I could do that, but I'm just trying something different for a change. It's not going to be an issue. The clay comes off soon as you hit it with water. It's just, you know, I guess I should explain for those new to my channel, this is what I use for my resist. This is what's known as clay slip. It's just liquid clay. This is solidified a bit because I just let it dry out and just wet it up the day before I need to use it. And you use it just like you would use a latex mask. You just paint it on. Now when I paint this with whatever colour I'm going to paint it, that will be the resist. So what is underneath that will show. So, you know, if I just put it on roughly, can put little scratches in. All you want to do is not make something that looks like a brush mark. And you'll put it along all the raised edges usually, because that's where it's going to get worn, especially around the pistol grip. It's going to get held here. These corners are going to get bumped and worn, and you can even just run the ferrule of the brush along. It'll just leave some clay behind, and you'll get your worn, distressed look. Any raised edge. So when the paint goes over this, and then I take it off, paint it the colour I'm going to paint it, which is going to be sort of a light grey, then I take this stuff off, the silver will show through. Oh, I'll put some in here, of course, where all the wear from the trigger finger has been. Right guys, here to mix my base colour, and the inspiration for this camouflage came from this book, Amtrak Wars, Dark Visions, a guide to the Amtrak Wars. And I got this years ago because I flipped through it and I saw this and I thought, woohoo! The colours really, I just remembered them for this Mars build. They've even got an image of the weapons the soldiers use. There we go. Just seeing that, that's too much, I think. So I'm going to have to be very careful how much of this camo pattern I put on, probably 1 or 2 stripes. I'm looking at this like a dark orangey brown base with streaks of red and maybe black or dark brown. Ideas about how to mask. Like, I'm going to mask off this pistol grip because I want it to appear like black plastic. So I've got this uneven line there, so just put a bit of masking tape over it and press down what you can with your finger, then get yourself a skewer and press it down more, get it right into the crevice, and then go along vertically with your craft knife this diagonal line. Doesn't matter if you haven't got enough tape, you can always add some more later. Right guys, just on the subject of masking, what I tend to do is use existing lines when I can. So this whole handle has a moulded line piece in there, so what I've done, I've cut off the tape below the line so when I come to paint this, this part will look like it's part of this, and this, the rail is bolted into this housing. So it's just a simple way of making it look like it's 2 separate pieces.